In medieval London, only 20% of the population escaped peasant life, forming a powerful middle class that controlled entire cities through secretive guilds, complex monopolies, and royal connections. While peasants starved during famines, these guild families grew wealthier, lived decades longer, and even got away with robbery when connected to the king. Here's what life was really like as part of medieval England's urban middle class. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, let's head back to 14th century London. Trust me, it's gonna be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously, adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're gonna want to be cozy. Your eyes crack open to complete darkness. The first thing that hits you isn't sight, it's smell. Smoky wool, unwashed bodies, the sharp tang of urine from the chamber pot in the corner, and underneath it all, something exotic and unfamiliar. Cinnamon, perhaps? Cloves? You're waking up in the cramped attic of a merchant's house in London, 1345. You're Thomas, a 14-year-old apprentice to Master Edmund Gardner, a prosperous spice merchant of the Grocers Guild. The attic is crowded with 5 other apprentices, all boys between 12 and 17, packed like spice barrels on straw pallets. The oldest, William, is already stirring. Moonlight cuts through the shuttered window just enough to see his outline as he reaches for his woolen tunic. "Get up, Thomas," William hisses. "Cook's fire needs stoking, and Master Edmund has inventory today." You groan and roll over. Not like your comfy modern bed. This straw pallet gives you no comfort, and the rough wool blanket scratches your skin. The cold hits immediately. London mornings in autumn are brutal. Your breath clouds in front of your face as you pull on your simple linen undertunic, followed by a brown woolen overtunic that reaches to your knees. "Do you think we'll get to help with the new pepper shipment?" you whisper to William, trying not to wake the others. "Not you," he scoffs. 2 years before you touch the good spices. Master doesn't let first years near anything worth more than a few pence." And he's right. The pepper arriving today is worth more than you'd earn in 10 years as a farmhand. A single sack could feed a village for months. In your head, you're doing the math. Your family gave everything they had, £2 sterling, just to secure this apprenticeship with Master Gardner. For 7 years, you'll work for no wages, just room, board and training. If you survive and learn the trade, you might become a journeyman, but becoming a master yourself, that's like dreaming of becoming royalty. The stairs creak as you descend from the attic, past the family's private bedchambers on the first floor, down to the ground level. The house is narrow but tall, wedged between similar structures on Soppers Lane, where many of London's spice merchants live and work. Unlike the thatched cottage you grew up in, this 3-story timber-framed townhouse has plastered walls and even glass in some of the windows, a luxury almost unimaginable in the countryside. "You're late," barks Cook, a stout woman with forearms like a blacksmith from years of kneading bread. "Fire's nearly out. Edmund wants breakfast before prime." Prime, the morning prayer service. It's how everyone marks time. No clocks here, just church bells dividing your day. You hurriedly stoke the kitchen fire, adding small pieces of split oak that cost a fortune in the city. As the flames grow, you catch glimpses of the kitchen's contents. Hanging copper pots worth more than most peasants will see in a lifetime. Ceramic jugs from France, a carved wooden salt cellar. "Master wants the apprentices presentable today," Cook says, her hands already deep in dough. "Alderman Fraser is visiting the shop." An alderman. Your eyes widen. The city's elite governing officials, all chosen from guild membership. You've heard Master Edmund talk about wanting to be elected alderman himself someday, the first step toward becoming mayor. "Is the shipment really coming today?" you ask, trying to sound casual while stealing a crust of yesterday's bread. Cook gives you a knowing look. "Aye, from the docks this morning. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger and cloves from places you can't even imagine. Now go fetch water before I box your ears." You grab 2 wooden buckets and head out the back door to the communal well shared by several houses on the lane. The sky is just beginning to lighten, turning the narrow street into a canyon of shadows. Unlike your village, where everyone sleeps until dawn, the city is already stirring. Apprentices like you fetching water, shop owners preparing for the day, servants emptying chamber pots into the gutters that run down the middle of the street. "Morning, Thomas," calls Eliza, the cooper's daughter, already waiting at the well with her own bucket. At 16, she's tall and confident, her father being a respected guild member himself. "Heard your master's getting the Venice shipment today." "How do you know that?" you ask, surprised. She laughs. "Everyone knows everything on Sopper's Lane. My father says the grocers are getting richer by the day, not like the coopers who just make barrels for everyone else's goods." "Yeah, but without barrels, how would spices travel?" you say, trying to sound wise despite knowing almost nothing about either trade yet. The well water is cold enough to sting your hands as you fill the buckets. Unlike in your village, where water came from a stream and tasted sweet, city water has a metallic tang that took weeks to get used to. You've heard horror stories of London's water making people sick, which is why most people drink weak ale instead, even children. Struggling with the heavy buckets, you make your way back to the house. The city is coming alive now, and the narrow street is getting crowded. A cart piled high with firewood squeezes past, forcing you against a wall. A friar shuffles by, mumbling prayers. 2 men in fine wool tunics with fur trim, guild members, definitely, discuss business in hushed tones. The survival hierarchy is obvious even to your young eyes. Merchants in clean clothes walk confidently down the centre of the street. Craftsmen in practical garb move with purpose. Labourers stoop under heavy loads. And the truly poor, the crippled beggar huddled in a doorway, the hollow-eyed woman selling wilted vegetables from a small basket, they exist in the margins, invisible to the wealthy. Back at the house, the family is awakening. You hear Master Edmund's deep voice upstairs, giving instructions to his wife, Margaret. Their 2 children, Catherine, age 8, and little Henry, just 4, are being dressed by their nurse, Agnes. William and 2 other apprentices, Robert and John, are already in the kitchen, wolfing down their breakfast of coarse bread and ale. As the most junior apprentice, you eat last, which often means least. You eye the rapidly emptying bread basket with concern. "Where's Matthew?" you ask, referring to the 5th apprentice. "Sick again," says Robert through a mouthful of bread. "Coughing all night. Master says he might have to send him home if he doesn't improve." Sent home. The words send a chill through you that has nothing to do with the morning air. Being sent home means failure, a disgrace your family couldn't bear. More than that, it means returning to the grinding poverty of rural life, where failed harvests mean starvation. Here, even in the lowest position in a merchant's household, you eat every day. The bread might be day old, but it's certain. "Thomas," Master Edmund's voice booms from above. "Are you deaf, boy? Bring water for washing." You grab the smaller basin and a clean cloth, rushing up the narrow stairs to the family's bedchamber. Unlike the apprentice's attic, this room is spacious and well furnished. A large bed with actual feathers dominates the space, draped with wool curtains for warmth and privacy. A chest containing the family's clothes stands against one wall, elaborately carved with leaf patterns. A small table holds a mirror, actual glass worth a fortune, and Margaret's few pieces of jewellery. Master Edmund is already dressed in a fine blue woolen tunic with a belt of tooled leather. At 40, he's a large man with a reddish beard just beginning to show grey. He stands by the window looking out at his domain. "Today is important, boy," he says without turning. "The alderman doesn't visit shops without reason. Everything must be perfect. You'll assist in the shop after we return from church." Your heart races. The shop. Usually, you're relegated to household chores, deliveries, or warehouse work. The shop on the ground floor of the house is where the actual business happens, where wealthy customers come to purchase their spices, where money changes hands. "Yes, master," you say, trying to contain your excitement. "And for God's sake, wash your face properly," Margaret adds, adjusting her headdress, a white linen wimple that covers her hair completely as befits a respectable merchant's wife. "You look like you've been sleeping in the coal bin." After helping the family prepare for the day, you join the household procession to St Mary Le Bow Church for morning mass. The Gardner family walks ahead, Master Edmund and Mistress Margaret, followed by their children and Agnes. Behind them come the senior apprentices, with you at the rear. The church bells are ringing across London, calling the faithful to prayer. The street is now fully alive. Shopkeepers are setting up displays, apprentices are sweeping doorsteps, and craftsmen are opening their workshops. The smell of fresh bread mingles with the less pleasant odours of a city where sanitation is an afterthought. You step carefully to avoid the worst of the muck in the street. "You know what today really is?" William whispers as you walk. "Master's being considered for Warden of the Grocers' Guild. That's why the alderman's coming." Your eyes widen. Warden is a position of real power. One of the officers who runs the guild, setting prices, controlling who can join, and wielding influence in city politics. "How do you know?" you ask. William taps his nose. 3 years as senior apprentice, you learn to listen at doors. Master's been campaigning for months. Dinners, gifts, promises. That pepper shipment. It's not just business, it's politics. At church, the social hierarchy is on full display. The merchant families sit near the front, while craftsmen fill the middle and the poor stand at the back. The priest delivers the Mass in Latin, words you don't understand but have memorized through repetition. The Gardner family follows along in a small prayer book, another luxury, as books cost more than most people earn in years. Looking around, you notice something odd. Almost everyone here is connected to a guild. The wealthy merchants from the Great 12 companies, the mercers, grocers, drapers, fishmongers, goldsmiths, sit in the very front rows. Behind them are lesser guild members, the coopers, wax chandlers, bakers. Even the church's carved decorations were made by guild craftsmen. The guild system isn't just business, it's the backbone of the entire city. After Mass, you walk back to Soppers Lane with a growing sense of anticipation. Today, you'll see the shop, the heart of the business that might someday be your livelihood if you're extraordinarily lucky. The Gardner house has a different feel when you return. Servants are rushing about, preparing for important visitors. Cook has laid out small sweet cakes flavoured with the very spices Master Edmund sells, a display of wealth meant to impress the alderman. The shop itself, normally closed on Sunday, is being specially opened for this visit. "Thomas, come," calls William. "Help me prepare the shop." You follow him through the internal door that connects the household to the business space. The shop takes up the entire ground floor front of the house, with large shutters that open onto the street, creating a counter for serving customers. Inside, the walls are lined with shelves holding ceramic jars of various sizes, each carefully labelled. The air is thick with an intoxicating blend of aromas: sharp pepper, warm cinnamon, pungent cloves, earthy nutmeg. Close your mouth before you catch flies. William laughs, seeing your expression. First time in the Holy of Holies, eh? You nod, speechless. This small room contains more wealth than you've ever seen. A single jar of these spices could buy a peasant's cottage outright. Here, William hands you a broom. Sweep while I dust the jars, then we'll set out the scales. The scales are kept in a locked chest, beautiful brass instruments with small weights shaped like acorns. These aren't just tools, they're symbols of the Grocers Guild itself, which has the right to test and verify weights and measures throughout London. False weights mean heavy fines, or worse, expulsion from the guild. So this is where Master sells everything? You ask, sweeping carefully around the central table where samples are displayed. William snorts. Hardly. This is just for small sales and showing off to important people. The real business happens at the warehouses near the docks or at the grocer's hall. Master Edmund deals in barrels and sacks, not spoonfuls. A shadow darkens the doorway as Master Edmund enters, followed by a thin man in an expensive fur-lined cloak. This must be Alderman Fraser. As you can see, Thomas, Master Edmund says loudly, gesturing toward you, we train our apprentices thoroughly. Even the newest learns every aspect of the trade. You flush with embarrassment, realising you're part of the display, proof that Master Edmund is contributing to the guild by training the next generation. Good, good, says the alderman, barely glancing at you. Now, Edmund, about this shipment. The guild will want their portion for the feast next month. £20 of pepper at guild rates. Guild rates, the special prices members give each other, far below what ordinary customers pay. Just another way the guild protects its own. Of course, Master Edmund agrees quickly, and I've secured those nutmegs you were asking about. Very rare, from islands so distant they don't appear on any map. The men move deeper into the shop, their voices dropping as they discuss business and politics, the two being inseparable in guild life. William nudges you. See how it works? Master gets the alderman rare spices at special prices. Alderman supports Master for Warden. Warden becomes eligible for higher office. Higher office means more wealth and connections. More connections mean better trade deals. And we just sweep the floors. You finish with a wry smile. For now, William says, his voice suddenly serious. But I'll be a journeyman next year. In 10 years, I might have my own shop. In 20, who knows? That's the beauty of the guilds, Thomas. Unlike the countryside, here a man can rise. As you continue preparing the shop, you realise what William means. In your village, a peasant's son would always be a peasant, but here in London, within the guild system, there's a ladder, difficult to climb, but real. Master Edmund himself started as an apprentice, or so the household stories go. His son Henry will have an easier path, born into the guild, but even outsiders like you have a chance, however small. The day continues with a flurry of activity. The pepper shipment arrives, 4 large sacks carried by burly porters, each sack worth more than the house itself. You're allowed to help unload them into the storeroom under strict supervision. The tiny black peppercorns seem unremarkable, yet people will pay fortunes for them, a reminder of how strange this new world is. As evening approaches and the important visitors leave, the household settles into its normal rhythm. You're sent to help in the kitchen again, peeling vegetables for the family's dinner. Through the small window, you watch the light fade over London's jumbled rooftops. Despite the hard work and your lowly position, you feel something unfamiliar. Hope. In the countryside, tomorrow would be exactly like today, and next year the same as this one. But here, in this guild household, tomorrow might bring new knowledge, new connections, new possibilities. You glance down at your hands, already changing after just 3 months in the city. The farm calluses are fading, replaced by different marks. A small burn from the kitchen fire, a cut from unpacking goods, ink stains from your writing lessons. Master Edmund insists all his apprentices learn to read and calculate, skills nearly unheard of among peasants but essential for merchants. Thomas, stop daydreaming and finish those turnips. Cook's voice cuts through your thoughts. You smile and return to your task. Tonight you'll climb back to that cramped attic, lie down on that uncomfortable straw pallet and listen to the other apprentices snore. But unlike in the village where sleep brought only brief respite from endless toil, here your dreams have direction. 7 years of service stretches ahead. Difficult years certainly, but with the guild structure guiding your path. Outside, the church bells ring for vespers, and London prepares for night. In manor houses outside the city, lords and ladies dine off silver plates. In villages across England, peasants huddle in dark, smoky huts. But here, in the middle, the urban middle class created by the guilds, you found a foothold in a world of possibility. As you crawl into your bed that night, exhausted but satisfied, you think about the spices you helped unload. Each one travelled thousands of miles, passing through countless hands, crossing borders and oceans to reach London. Your journey from farm to city seems small by comparison, but it's just as transformative. Tomorrow brings another day of apprenticeship, of watching, learning, and working toward a future that, for the first time, seems limited only by ability and opportunity, not by the circumstances of your birth. Such is the gift of the guilds, the foundation of medieval England's urban middle class. Your eyelids grow heavy as the sounds of the city fade. Unlike your ancestors who lived and died within miles of their birthplace, you've stepped into a wider world, one built on trade, craft, and the collective power of people working together. The guild system isn't perfect, but it's created something remarkable, a path for ordinary people to build extraordinary lives. Morning light filters through the oiled parchment covering the window as Edmund Gardner opens his eyes. Unlike his apprentices, who sleep packed like salted fish in the attic, he wakes in a feather bed with linen sheets and woolen blankets. Beside him, his wife Margaret stirs, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. "Today's the day," Edmund says, more to himself than to Margaret. "Fraser will back me for warden if I handle this properly." Margaret's eyes remain closed, but she's awake. After 16 years of marriage, Edmund knows her rhythms better than the tides of the Thames. "Don't push too hard," she murmurs. "The Mercer faction already thinks you're ambitious." Edmund snorts as he swings his legs over the side of the bed. The wooden floor is cold against his bare feet. "Ambitious? God's bones, woman. What merchant worth his salt isn't ambitious?" "There's ambition and there's wisdom," Margaret says, finally opening her eyes. "Remember Hugh de Garton? All that coin and royal favour, and then he gets caught robbing his neighbour like a common thief." Edmund waves away her concerns as he reaches for his linen undershirt. "De Garton was careless. I'm careful. The king pardoned him," Margaret continues, sitting up. £200 stolen and not a day in prison. Tell me that's not worth being cautious about." "That's exactly my point," Edmund says, pulling on his best blue tunic, the one with actual indigo dye, not the cheap woad most Londoners use. "The guilds protect their own. De Garton is Mercer's guild, and they have the king's ear. We grocers need more influence like that." Edmund moves to the small basin of water that young Thomas brought up earlier. It's cold, of course. Hot water is a luxury saved for the weekly bath, not daily washing. He splashes his face, the shock helping to clear the fog of sleep. From below comes the sounds of the household awakening. The clatter of cook in the kitchen, the murmur of apprentices, the high voices of the children, the familiar symphony of prosperity. Edmund's fingers trace the small wooden crucifix hanging at his neck, his morning ritual. Business and faith are inseparable in his world. The guild itself began as a religious fraternity, the Brotherhood of St. Anthony, before becoming the Company of Grocers. Even now, a portion of guild fees goes to maintain the guild's chapel and pay for masses for deceased members. "Will you check the pepper yourself before Fraser arrives?" Margaret asks, now fully awake and reaching for her kirtle. "Of course," Edmund replies. "I need to calculate the values before he starts negotiating. You know how the aldermen always want preferential rates." Margaret gives him a knowing look. "Just don't undervalue it too much. We still need to make a profit." "Woman, I've been trading spices since before you could count to 10, Edmund says with mock offence. "I know how to balance a favour against a profit." "And I've been keeping your accounts since we married," she counters. "Sometimes your political ambitions blind you to simple arithmetic." He laughs and kisses her forehead. This is their familiar dance, his grand ambitions tempered by her practical caution. Together they've built this household from nothing but an apprenticeship and a small dowry. "I'm having Thomas help in the shop today," Edmund says, changing the subject. Margaret pauses in pinning her wimple. "The new boy? Is he ready?" "No, but he needs to see how it's done. William says he's quick with figures, and he has a good manner, respectful but not timid." "Unlike that last boy you took on," Margaret says with a grimace. "What was his name? The one who kept knocking things over?" "Peter," Edmund says, wincing at the memory. "Cost me £3 in broken merchandise before I sent him back to his father." "At least Thomas comes from farm stock," Margaret says. "They know the value of work." Edmund nods, thinking of the thin, wide-eyed boy who arrived 3 months ago, the son of a franklin, a free landowner, not a serf, with enough ambition to send his son to London rather than keep him for farm labour. The apprenticeship fee of £2 had been significant for them, representing perhaps years of careful saving. For Edmund, taking apprentices serves multiple purposes. They provide labour, of course, cheaper than hiring servants, but more importantly, they're an investment in the guild's future and a fulfilment of his obligations as a guild member. Every master is expected to train the next generation, and occasionally, like William, an apprentice shows real promise, the potential to become not just a journeyman, but eventually a master himself. "Speaking of costs," Edmund says, buckling his belt, "we need to discuss the feast for the Guild Brothers next month. If I'm to be nominated for Warden, we should host it here." Margaret sighs. "Another feast? Edmund, we just paid for new shutters on the shop, and Catherine needs new shoes." "This is how it works," Edmund insists. "You want Catherine to marry well, don't you? A match with a draper's son, perhaps? Or even a mercer? That happens through connections, and connections happen over feasts and wine." Before Margaret can respond, there's a gentle knock at the door. Agnes, their servant, calls softly, "Master, the children are ready for breakfast." "We'll continue this later," Edmund says, giving Margaret a look that brooks no argument. "We have mass first, then business." Downstairs, the household has assembled for breakfast. The two children, Catherine and Henry, are already dressed in their Sunday clothes. The apprentices stand respectfully as Edmund enters, though he notices young Matthew is missing. "Where's the sick boy?" Edmund asks William. "Still abed, master," William replies. His cough worsened in the night. Edmund frowns. Illness is always a concern in a crowded city like London, but particularly in a merchant's household. If Matthew has something catching, it could spread through the apprentices and disrupt business for weeks. "Agnes," Edmund calls to the servant, "check on him after breakfast. If he's no better, we'll send for the physician." Agnes nods, though they both know what that means. Physicians are expensive, and while Edmund can afford one, it's an expense he'd rather avoid for a mere apprentice. But the guild also watches how masters treat their apprentices. Neglect would reflect poorly on him. Breakfast is simple but hearty. Fresh bread, a bit of cheese, and small beer, weak ale, which everyone drinks, even the children. Clean water is too risky in London, where the wells are often contaminated. Edmund eats quickly, his mind already on the day's business. After the meal, he leads the household to St Mary le Bow Church for Sunday Mass. As a prominent merchant, Edmund has a designated pew near the front, a small luxury that costs him an extra donation each year, but reinforces his status in the community. As they walk through the narrow streets, Edmund notes which shops are preparing to open after church and which remain shuttered. Sunday trading is officially discouraged but widely practiced, especially by those selling food or drink. The Grocers Guild, dealing in non-perishable goods, generally observes the Sabbath restrictions, though many transactions are simply conducted quietly at home. The church is already filling when they arrive. Edmund nods to familiar faces, fellow merchants, craftsmen, their families and apprentices, London's middle class, created and sustained by the guild system. He spots Richard Whitington, a mercer who's rapidly rising in influence, and makes a mental note to speak with him later. The mercers and grocers are natural allies in many city matters, despite their occasional rivalries. After Mass, Edmund walks back to Soppers Lane with purpose in his step. Unlike the apprentices, who see Sunday as their one day of slightly reduced labour, for Edmund it's often filled with the most important business, the meetings that can't happen during the regular trading week. "Thomas," he calls as they approach the house, "you'll attend me in the shop today." The boy's face lights up, and Edmund suppresses a smile. The eagerness of apprentices is always amusing. They think witnessing a transaction is a great privilege, not realizing how many tedious hours of negotiation it might entail. As soon as they enter the house, Edmund moves quickly through the domestic spaces to the shop at the front. Unlike the cluttered, crowded shops of lesser merchants, Edmund's establishment is designed to impress. The spices are stored in matching ceramic jars with painted labels. The counter is polished oak. Brass scales gleam on a side table, their accuracy certified by the guild's own inspectors. "William, open the shutters halfway," Edmund instructs. "Enough light to see, but not so open as to look like we're trading on the Sabbath." William nods and adjusts the large wooden shutters that form a counter when fully opened. Thomas stands awkwardly in the centre of the shop, clearly uncertain what to do. "You boy," Edmund says sharply, "come here." Thomas hurries over, nearly tripping on the edge of a rug from Damascus, another display of Edmund's far-reaching trade connections. "Today you'll learn the first rule of the spice trade," Edmund says. "Show me your hands." Thomas extends his hands, palms up. They're no longer the rough, calloused hands of a farm boy, but they're still marked with small cuts and stains from his work. "Clean?" Edmund asks. "Yes, master," Thomas says hesitantly. Edmund raises an eyebrow. "Are they? Let me see you handle this." He reaches into a small jar and removes a single cinnamon stick, handing it to Thomas. The boy takes it carefully. Now smell your fingers, Edmund instructs. Thomas does so, his eyes widening. They smell like the cinnamon. Exactly, Edmund says. And if your hands are dirty, that dirt transfers to the spice. If the spice is contaminated, its value decreases. In the Grocers Guild, clean hands aren't just about hygiene, they're about protecting our investment. Thomas nods seriously, and Edmund continues. The second rule, accurate weight. The guild's reputation depends on honest measure. Short a customer and word spreads. Give too much and you lose profit. Either way, you damage the guild. A knock at the door interrupts the lesson. William opens it to reveal John Fraser, the alderman, dressed in his finest clothing with a heavy gold chain of office around his neck. Edmund, Fraser says warmly, though his eyes are calculating. A fine morning for business. Indeed, John, Edmund replies, gesturing for Thomas to step back. You honour my humble shop. Fraser snorts at the word humble. They both know Edmund's operation is among the most profitable in the Grocers Guild. Let's not play games, Gardner. I've come about the pepper and the warden position. Edmund appreciates the directness. While guild politics often involve elaborate courtesy among the inner circle, plain speaking prevails. Of course, William, bring the sample chest. Thomas, return to the kitchen until called. As Thomas leaves, William appears with a small wooden chest, which he places on the counter before discreetly withdrawing to the storeroom, close enough to be called if needed, far enough to give the appearance of privacy. Edmund unlocks the chest with a key from his belt. Inside are small linen bags, each containing a sample of the spices from yesterday's shipment. He selects one and loosens the string, allowing Fraser to see the black peppercorns inside. Finest Malabar pepper, Edmund says. Arrived yesterday on the Swan. 3 months at sea, but perfectly preserved. Fraser takes a few corns, crushing one between his fingers and sniffing it. Good quality, he admits. How much arrived? Oh, 4 sacks, Edmund says, deliberately vague about the exact weight. Enough to meet the guild's needs for the feast next month, with some remaining for discretionary allocation. Fraser understands the implication. Beyond the official guild purchase, there will be private sales to influential members at special rates, a common practice that blurs the line between business and politics. And the price? Fraser asks, though they both know this is where the real negotiation begins. Edmund names a figure slightly above the market rate, as expected. Fraser counters with an offer well below it. Also, as expected, they settle, after the proper amount of haggling, on a price that's actually exactly what Edmund had calculated as fair before Fraser arrived. The dance of negotiation matters as much as the outcome. Now, Edmund says, securing the sample bags, about the warden nomination. Fraser's expression becomes more guarded. There are several worthy candidates. Of course, Edmund agrees smoothly. The guild is blessed with capable men, but few have my experience with eastern trade routes, and fewer still have managed to maintain good relations with both the Venetian and Genoese merchants. This is true, and they both know it. Edmund has cultivated contacts among the Italian traders who dominate the Mediterranean spice routes, playing the rivals against each other to secure better prices. Warden is not merely about trade connections, Fraser says carefully. It's about managing the guild's internal affairs, the training of apprentices, the maintenance of standards, the adjudication of disputes. Edmund nods. I've trained 12 apprentices over 15 years. 6 have become journeymen. 2 are now masters with their own shops. My standards are well known in the guild, and as for disputes, he smiles thinly. I believe my reputation for fairness speaks for itself. Fraser considers this. There's also the matter of your ambitions, Edmund. Some feel you're rising too quickly. Ambition serves the guild when properly directed, Edmund counters. The drapers and mercers grow stronger each year. The grocers must match them or be left behind. This touches on a sensitive point. The Great 12 livery companies, the most powerful guilds in London, constantly jockey for position. Currently, the grocers rank second only to the mercers in prestige, but their position is not secure. You make a compelling case, Fraser admits. But there's one more thing. The guild needs a new trade hall. The old one is too small for our growing membership. A warden would be expected to contribute generously to such a project. And there it is. The real price of advancement. Not just the pepper at a favourable rate, but a substantial donation to the guild's building fund. Edmund had anticipated this and already discussed it with Margaret, though he'd not mentioned the likely amount. "I would be honoured to support such a worthy cause," Edmund says carefully. "Perhaps £20 would be an appropriate contribution." Fraser's eyebrows rise slightly. £20 is a substantial sum, more than many small merchants earn in a year, but for a prosperous spice trader like Edmund, it's significant without being crippling. Very appropriate, Fraser agrees. Combined with your generous pricing on the pepper, I believe that would address any concerns about your suitability for the position. The negotiation concluded, they shake hands. Fraser departs with a small sample of the pepper to show the other guild officers and a promise to speak in Edmund's favour at the next guild meeting. As the door closes behind the alderman, Edmund allows himself a small smile of satisfaction. The path to warden is now clear, and from warden to the higher echelons of guild leadership, perhaps eventually even to alderman himself, and from there, who knows? The Mayor of London is always chosen from among the guild elite. "William," Edmund calls, "fetch Thomas back. His education should continue." While waiting, Edmund unlocks a small chest beneath the counter and updates his personal account book, a bound volume of parchment sheets where he records his most important transactions. Unlike most merchants who rely on tally sticks or memory for routine business, Edmund maintains detailed written records of everything. It's a skill he learned from an Italian trader years ago, and one he considers essential to his success. The door opens and Thomas returns, looking nervous. "Come, boy," Edmund says, gesturing him closer. "You've missed the negotiation, but there's still much to learn. Tell me, what do you know about how spices reach London?" Thomas hesitates. "They come on ships from far away?" Edmund suppresses a sigh. "Yes, but that's like saying babies come from women. Technically correct, but missing all the interesting details." William, sorting spice jars nearby, chokes back a laugh. "The pepper you helped unload yesterday," Edmund continues, "began its journey in the Malabar coast of India. Farmers there grow the pepper vines, harvest the corns, and dry them in the sun. Local merchants buy from the farmers and sell to Arab traders, who carry the pepper across the Indian Ocean to ports in the Red Sea." Thomas's eyes widen as Edmund traces the journey on the countertop as if it were a map. From there, it travels by camel caravan to Alexandria in Egypt. Venetian or Genoese merchants buy it there and ship it across the Mediterranean to Italy. Then it crosses the Alps on muleback to markets in France or the Low Countries. Finally, it reaches London on ships sailing into the Thames. "That's incredible," Thomas says. "How long does all that take?" "Years, sometimes," Edmund says. "The pepper you unloaded might have been harvested 3 years ago, and at each step someone takes a profit. By the time it reaches my shop, a sack of pepper worth perhaps 5 shillings at the source costs £5 or more." "So much," Thomas exclaims, clearly trying to calculate how many days' labour that represents for an ordinary worker. "Indeed," Edmund says, "and that's why the spice trade requires guilds. No individual merchant could manage such complex trade routes alone. We need collective agreements, shared risks, pooled knowledge." He opens a different jar and removes a small piece of nutmeg, holding it up to the light. This is even more valuable than pepper. It comes from islands so remote that few Europeans know their location. The Arabs and Venetians protect their trade secrets jealously, but through the guild I can access these rare goods. Thomas stares at the nutmeg with new appreciation. Is that why spices cost so much, because they're so hard to get? Partly, Edmund says, but it's also because they last. Wheat rots, ale sours, cloth moths eat, but properly stored spices keep their value for years. In uncertain times they're as good as gold. Better sometimes because everyone needs to eat, but not everyone needs gold coins. He returns the nutmeg to its jar. The guild ensures quality and regulates prices. Without us, the market would be chaos. Adulterated goods, wildly fluctuating prices, unreliable supplies. The customer pays more, yes, but receives an assured quality and steady availability. Edmund watches Thomas absorbing this information. The boy is sharp, which is promising. A good merchant needs more than just honesty and hard work. He needs intelligence and adaptability. There's one more thing you should understand, Edmund says, lowering his voice, although there's no one else in the shop. The guild isn't just about trade, it's about survival. Thomas looks puzzled, and Edmund continues. Think about your village. When crops fail, what happens? People starve, Thomas says simply. Last winter, 3 families in our parish died when the rains flooded the fields. Edmund nods grimly. Exactly, but when was the last time you heard of a guild member starving? Even in the Great Famine 30 years ago, when peasants were eating bark and roots, London's guild members survived. We help each other. If one merchant fails, others support him. If someone dies, the guild cares for his widow and children. He gestures to the street outside. That's the true power of the middle class, as some call us. Not just wealth, but security, protection from the cruel whims of nature and fortune that kill so many of the poor. A church bell rings in the distance, marking the hour before noon. Edmund glances at the door, expecting Margaret to call them for the midday meal soon. Enough philosophy, he says briskly. Before dinner, you'll learn something practical. William, show Thomas how to properly weigh cloves and explain why we have different weights for buying and selling. William grins. Yes, master. As Edmund turns to go check on the household affairs, he adds casually, and Thomas, if you're ever fortunate enough to become a shop owner yourself, remember today. The guild protects its own, but it also demands much. Every privilege comes with obligation. Thomas nods solemnly, and Edmund sees in the boy's eyes the same hunger he once felt, the desire to rise, to secure not just wealth, but the safety it brings. The guild system isn't perfect, but it offers something precious, the chance for ordinary men to build extraordinary lives, protected by the collective power of their brotherhood. Walking through to the living quarters, Edmund reflects on how far he's come from his own apprenticeship. 25 years ago, he too was a wide-eyed boy learning to handle spices with clean hands. Now he stands on the cusp of becoming a warden of the Grocers Guild, with all the power and responsibility that entails. The smell of the midday meal, a hearty pottage of vegetables and a small amount of salted beef greets him as he enters the hall. Margaret is already there, supervising the table setting. Their eyes meet, and he gives a small nod. She understands immediately. The meeting with Fraser went well. The investment in pepper and coin will yield the position they've worked toward for years. In the comfortable home of a successful London merchant with the security of guild membership around him and the prospect of greater influence ahead, Edmund Gardner feels a deep satisfaction. The chaotic uncertainties that plague the lives of peasants and labourers seem distant here. Through skill, ambition, and the powerful structure of the guild system, he has carved out a place in the world where his family can thrive, the very essence of medieval England's urban middle class. Margaret Gardner watches her husband enter the hall with that familiar look of satisfaction on his face. After 16 years of marriage, she can read Edmund like one of his account books. The meeting with Alderman Fraser went well, which means they'll soon be hosting feasts for guild members. Expensive, elaborate affairs that will strain their resources, but potentially yield greater rewards. Agnes, make sure the children wash properly before eating, Margaret says to the servant before turning her attention to the main table. The midday meal is modest by their usual standards, a vegetable pottage with a small amount of salted beef, fresh bread and ale. Margaret has deliberately kept it simple today, knowing that the afternoon will bring the week's major cooking tasks. Sunday is when she plans the household's meals for the coming days, tallies the pantry stores and makes lists of what must be purchased at tomorrow's market. Unlike the wives of nobility who merely oversee servants, Margaret is deeply involved in running her household. The Gardner family can afford 3 servants: cook Agnes, who helps with the children, and Berta, who assists with laundry and cleaning, but the bulk of management falls to Margaret herself. "Will we be hosting the guild officers this month?" she asks Edmund quietly as they take their places at the head of the table. "Yes," he confirms. "Fraser as good as promised me the warden nomination. We'll need to impress the voting members." Margaret nods, mentally calculating costs. A feast for 20 guild brothers would require at least 3 types of meat, fish, elaborate sauces, and plenty of wine. Not to mention new rushlights, perhaps hiring musicians, and possibly new table linens. Edmund's political ambitions are expensive. The family and household staff gather around the table. Edmund and Margaret at the head, the children to their right, the senior apprentices to their left, and the servants and junior apprentices at the far end. Edmund says the blessing, and they begin to eat. "Thomas joined me in the shop today," Edmund tells Margaret as he tears a piece of bread. The boy shows promise. "Does he?" Margaret asks, watching the skinny apprentice at the far end of the table. "William speaks well of him too, says he's quick with figures, quicker than most." He grasped the pepper trade route explanation immediately. Margaret smiles. "Well, that's more than can be said for some of the merchants' sons I've met. Born to the guild and still can't tell nutmeg from mace." Their daughter Catherine pipes up. "Father, will Thomas work in the shop more now?" "Perhaps," Edmund says. "Why do you ask?" "He told me about the farm where he grew up," the 8-year-old says. "They had cows and chickens. I've never seen a real cow." "And you likely won't in London," Margaret says, "unless you count the ones being driven to Smithfield Market for slaughter." "Can I go to the market with you tomorrow?" Catherine asks eagerly. Margaret exchanges a glance with Edmund. Their daughter is reaching the age where she needs to learn household management, but Cheapside Market can be rough, especially on busy days. "You may come," Margaret decides, "but you'll stay close to me, and Agnes will accompany us." Catherine beams, while her younger brother Henry looks put out at being excluded. At 4, he's still too young for the bustling market. As the meal continues, Margaret observes the household dynamics with a practiced eye. The newest apprentice, Thomas, eats quickly but neatly. Good manners for a farm boy. Matthew is absent, still sick in bed. The senior apprentices discuss yesterday's shipment in hushed tones, while Cook quietly informs Berta which breads to bake tomorrow. This is Margaret's domain, the smooth operation of a merchant household that serves as both family home and business headquarters. Unlike peasant women who work alongside their husbands in the fields, or noble women who primarily manage social affairs, women of the merchant class occupy a unique position, deeply involved in business matters while maintaining traditional domestic roles. After the meal, Edmund retreats to his counting room, a small chamber off the hall where he keeps his accounts and conducts private business. The apprentices are given their Sunday tasks, mending clothes, studying their letters, or helping with household maintenance. The children are sent with Agnes to practice their reading. Now begins Margaret's busiest time of day. First, she checks on Matthew, the sick apprentice. The boy is feverish, his cough dry and painful. "How long has it been this bad?" she asks, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "Since last night, mistress," he rasps. "I tried not to wake the others." Margaret frowns. "Agnes will bring you some honey and hyssop for that cough. If you're no better by morning, we'll send for the physician." In truth, she's worried. Illness spreads quickly through a household, and with the possibility of hosting guild officers soon, they can't afford an outbreak of disease. But the boy also represents a significant investment, his apprenticeship fee and 3 years of training already given. Masters are judged partly by how well they care for their apprentices. Next, Margaret goes to the kitchen, where Cook is already preparing bread dough for tomorrow's baking. "We need to discuss the coming week," Margaret says, sitting at the small table in the corner. From her sleeve she pulls a small parchment notebook, another Italian innovation Edmund brought back from his travels. Cook wipes her hands on her apron. "What's the master planning now?" "Guild officers' feast, likely within the fortnight," Margaret says. 20 men, at least." Cook groans. "Not another one. We just did the Michaelmas feast last month." "This is different," Margaret explains. "Edmund is being nominated for warden. It could mean a great deal for the family, and more work for the rest of us," Cook grumbles, but without real anger. The household staff takes pride in their master's rise, knowing their own status increases alongside his. Together, they plan the week's ordinary meals and begin organising the potential feast. Special occasions require careful planning. Certain foods must be ordered days in advance, spices measured out from Edmund's precious store, extra help hired for the day itself. "We'll need at least 3 fish dishes for the feast," Margaret says. "It's important to show we observe proper fasting days, but also that we can afford the best fish. Pike, if we can get it. Eel, certainly." "And sweets?" Cook asks. The last time the guild officers came, they praised those little spiced cakes. "Yes, with plenty of cinnamon and ginger, and we'll use saffron in the sauce for the main dish, show off the spice trade connection." This is where Margaret's role intersects directly with Edmund's business. By displaying their access to exotic spices in their food, they demonstrate the success of his trade. A merchant's table is never just about feeding people. It's a statement of wealth and connection. With the kitchen plans settled, Margaret moves to the small garden behind the house. Unlike country homes with large kitchen gardens, London townhouses have limited space. Still, Margaret maintains a small plot of essential herbs: rosemary, sage, thyme, and precious saffron crocuses. In the cramped growing conditions of the city, every sprig matters. As she checks the plants, she hears a commotion from the street, raised voices and rapid footsteps. Curious, she moves to the garden gate and peers out into the narrow alley that runs behind the row of houses. A woman hurries past, her expression worried. It's Eliza Cooper, wife of the barrel maker whose workshop sits at the end of the lane. "What's happening?" Margaret calls. Eliza stops, recognizing her. "Fire on Fish Street," she says breathlessly. "They're calling for help to form a bucket line." Fire. The word sends a chill through Margaret. Nothing terrifies Londoners more than fire. The closely packed wooden houses can burn with frightening speed, and a blaze that starts in one building can quickly consume an entire street. How bad? Margaret asks. Just starting when John left to help, Eliza says, referring to her husband. But with this wind... She doesn't need to finish. With a westerly wind, a fire on Fish Street could potentially spread towards Soppers Lane if not contained quickly. I'll send the apprentices, Margaret says decisively, and check our water barrels. Fire preparation is another of Margaret's responsibilities. Every London household maintains barrels of water specifically for fighting fires, a communal defence system where all are expected to help their neighbours. Hurrying back inside, Margaret finds Edmund already mobilising the senior apprentices. William, Robert, John, go help with the bucket line, he orders. Thomas, stay here and help prepare our own defences. As the older boys rush out, Edmund turns to Margaret. It's 4 streets away, but with this wind... I know, she says. I'll start moving the valuables to the cellar, just in case. This is their fire plan, developed after seeing neighbouring houses burn years ago. The stone cellar is the safest place for Edmund's account books, Margaret's silver cup, a wedding gift from her father, and the small chest containing their coins and Margaret's few pieces of jewellery. I'll check the roof for falling embers, Edmund says, already moving toward the stairs. For the next hour, the household bustles with precautionary activity. Thomas proves useful, showing no fear of heights as he joins Edmund on the roof. The children are kept occupied by Agnes, who tells them it's just a drill, no need to frighten them unnecessarily. From the upper windows, Margaret can see smoke rising several streets away, but it doesn't seem to be spreading toward them. Finally, William returns, sooty but relieved. It's contained, he reports. 3 houses burned, but they formed the bucket line in time. The wind shifted, which helped. Margaret offers a silent prayer of thanks. London has seen entire districts destroyed by fire in the past. This time, they were lucky. With the excitement over, the household returns to Sunday routine. Margaret uses the quiet afternoon hours to work on household accounts, a task she shares with Edmund. While he manages the business ledgers, she keeps track of household expenses, servants' wages, and daily purchases. Sitting at the small table in the solar, the private family room above the hall, Margaret opens her account book. Unlike most merchant wives who keep records with tally sticks or memory, Margaret writes everything down. It's a skill Edmund taught her early in their marriage, recognising her aptitude for numbers. The book reveals the complex economics of running a substantial household. Last week's entries include payments for firewood, candles, cloth for new bed linens, shoes for Henry, wages for the servants, and charitable donations to the parish poor fund. Margaret reviews each item, calculating their current financial position. The potential feast for guild officers will be expensive, perhaps £5 total, a significant sum, but if it helps secure the warden position for Edmund, the investment will be worthwhile. Wardens receive special trading privileges and connections that could be worth far more than the cost of one elaborate meal. As she works, Catherine slips into the room, her reading lesson with Agnes apparently finished. "Mother, can I help?" she asks, peering at the account book. Margaret smiles. "Come sit," she says, patting the bench beside her. "It's time you learned more about household management." Catherine settles next to her mother, her small face serious. At 8, she's already showing signs of the same practicality that Margaret prides herself on. "This is how we track our spending," Margaret explains, pointing to the columns of figures. "Every penny must be accounted for, or we won't know if we're living within our means." Like when Cook asks for more money for the market, Catherine asks. Exactly. I need to know if she's spending wisely or being wasteful. Margaret turns a page. See here? Last month we spent more on candles than usual. That's because the days are getting shorter. And we need more light. Catherine studies the neat figures. Will I need to know this when I'm married? Yes, especially if you marry a merchant, Margaret says. A foolish wife can ruin even a successful businessman. Many men are excellent at earning money but careless about spending it. Like father with his feasts? Catherine asks innocently. Margaret stifles a laugh. The child misses nothing. Your father's feasts are business investments, not mere extravagance, but yes, sometimes I must remind him to balance ambition with prudence. She turns another page in the book. Look here, this is where I record special expenses, like your education. Catherine sees the entry for her reading lessons with the parish clerk, a few pence each week, but a significant investment in a daughter's future. Unlike peasant girls who learn only household skills, merchant daughters often receive basic education in reading and numbers. Will I learn accounting too? Catherine asks. If you wish, Margaret says. A merchant's wife should understand her husband's business. How else can she help manage it when he's away on trading journeys? This is the reality of merchant-class marriages. They're economic partnerships as much as familial ones. When Edmund travels to Flanders or France to arrange spice shipments, Margaret oversees not just the household, but many aspects of the business as well. She can check inventories, supervise apprentices, and even conduct basic transactions with regular customers. A knock at the door interrupts their lesson. It's Berta, looking concerned. Mistress, that boy Matthew seems worse, she says. His breathing's gone strange. Margaret rises immediately. Stay here, she tells Catherine. Continue practicing your sums. In the apprentice's attic, Matthew lies on his pallet, his breathing laboured and his face flushed with fever. Margaret places a hand on his forehead, burning hot. How long has he been like this? She demands of Thomas, who's sitting nearby. Just this past hour, Thomas says, looking scared. He was talking earlier, but now he just moans. Margaret makes a quick decision. Thomas, run to Master Green the apothecary. Tell him we need feverfew and something for a chest inflammation. Quickly now. As Thomas scurries off, Margaret examines Matthew more closely. The boy's illness has progressed rapidly, too rapidly for comfort. She's seen cases like this before, where a simple cough transforms into something deadly within days. Berta, bring clean cloths and cool water, she orders, and find Edmund. While waiting, Margaret loosens Matthew's tunic and props him up with a folded blanket to ease his breathing. The boy's eyes flutter open briefly, unfocused and glassy. My mother? He murmurs. Shh, Margaret soothes. Rest now. We're caring for you. Edmund arrives, his expression grave as he assesses the situation. Should we send for the physician? He asks quietly. Margaret nods. And perhaps the priest as well. They both know what this means. If the boy's condition is serious enough to warrant both doctor and priest, his chances are poor. An apprentice's death isn't just a personal tragedy. It affects the household's reputation and requires careful management with the guild and the boy's family. I'll send William, Edmund says, and I'll write to Matthew's father in case he needs to come. As Edmund leaves, Margaret continues tending to the sick boy. This too is part of her role as the household's female head, nursing the ill, whether family members or servants or apprentices. In a world without hospitals, home care is the only option for all but the destitute, who might seek help at church-run almshouses. Berta returns with water and cloths, and together they work to cool Matthew's fever. The boy drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his mother, sometimes lying terrifyingly still. Thomas returns breathless from the apothecary, carrying a small packet of herbs. Master Green says to make a tea with these, he explains, and also to rub this salve on his chest. Margaret takes the remedies. Thank you, Thomas. Now go help cook with dinner preparations. But I want to help Matthew, the boy protests. The best help you can give is to keep the household running, Margaret says firmly. Too many people in a sick room only make things worse. Reluctantly, Thomas leaves. Margaret brews the medicinal tea using the small brazier kept in the attic for winter warming. The bitter smell fills the small space as she coaxes Matthew to drink small sips. Hours pass as Margaret maintains her vigil. The physician arrives, an expensive visit that will cost Edmund several shillings, and confirms what Margaret already suspects. Lung fever, potentially fatal, especially for someone weakened by previous illness. Keep him warm, continue the herbal tea and pray, the physician advises after examining the boy. I'll return tomorrow if he survives the night. As dusk falls, Margaret finally leaves Matthew in Berta's care and returns downstairs. The household has continued functioning in her absence. Cook has prepared a simple supper, Agnes has overseen the children's evening activities, and Edmund has managed the apprentice's duties. This is the mark of a well-run merchant household. It can adapt to crises without falling into chaos. Each person knows their responsibilities and can adjust when necessary. The hierarchy is clear but flexible, unlike the rigid structures of noble houses or the desperate scramble of peasant families. At supper, the mood is subdued. Matthew's illness casts a shadow over the household, reminding everyone of life's fragility even within the relative security of guild membership. Will Matthew die? Henry asks bluntly with a child's directness. Margaret exchanges a glance with Edmund. They never shield their children from life's realities. Another difference between merchant families and nobility, who often keep their children insulated from unpleasantness. He's very ill, Margaret says gently. We're doing everything we can to help him. If he does die, Edmund adds, it will be in a clean bed with proper care, not abandoned like so many poor souls. That's one blessing of being part of this household. The answer seems to satisfy Henry, who returns to his soup. Catherine remains quiet, thoughtful, beyond her years. After the meal, as the household prepares for bed, Margaret finds a moment alone with Edmund in their chamber. If Matthew doesn't survive, she says quietly, it will be the second apprentice we've lost in 3 years. Edmund nods grimly. I know, the guild might question whether there's something unwholesome about our household. This is a serious concern. In a society where disease is poorly understood, patterns of illness can be attributed to moral failings or divine disfavour. 2 dead apprentices could suggest the gardeners are either negligent. On June 14, 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte, first consul of France, faced complete defeat at the Battle of Marengo when 30,000 Austrian troops surprised his scattered forces. By mid-afternoon, his army was in full retreat and victory seemed impossible. But within hours, one of history's most dramatic battlefield reversals would cement Napoleon's legend and change the fate of Europe. Here's what it was really like to experience Napoleon's greatest comeback. Before we start, if these stories help you sleep, hitting subscribe would be amazing. And I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop your location and time in the comments. Sometimes I see someone from Tokyo commenting at what's like 3 a.m. my time. Okay, tonight we're heading back to the Napoleonic Wars. But before we go anywhere, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust your pillows, fix that blanket. Where we're going, you're definitely going to want to be settled in. Your eyes flutter open to a damp grey dawn in northern Italy. The first thing that hits you is the soreness. Every muscle in your body aches like you've been trampled by horses. You're not in your cosy bed with its memory foam and clean sheets. No, you're sprawled on hard-packed earth with only a thin, scratchy wool blanket between you and the ground. The June morning should be warm, but there's a chill that seeps right into your bones from the rain-soaked soil beneath you. Around you, thousands of French soldiers are stirring in the pre-dawn light. The smell is, let's just say, an army of men who haven't bathed in weeks creates its own special aroma. Sweat, leather, gunpowder, and something else, that underlying tension that comes before battle. Up. Get up. Citizen, the Austrians are moving. The shout jolts you fully awake. The year is 1800, and you're a soldier in Napoleon Bonaparte's army of reserve. And this day, June 14th, will become one of the most legendary in military history, though right now it just feels like another miserable morning in a foreign country where people keep trying to kill you. You scramble to your feet, grabbing your musket. Your stomach growls painfully. Dinner last night was a half ration of mouldy bread that you had to choke down with some questionable water. The supply wagons are somewhere far behind the army, and foraging parties haven't brought back much. Napoleon's bold strategy of crossing the Alps has gotten you behind enemy lines, but it's also gotten you pretty damn hungry. They're saying the Austrians are attacking from Alessandria, mutters the soldier next to you, a grizzled veteran named Marcel with a magnificent moustache and a missing front tooth. But that can't be right. The first consul said they'd be retreating. That's the thing about Napoleon Bonaparte. He's a military genius, sure, but even geniuses make mistakes, and this morning he's made a big one. See, Napoleon's convinced that the Austrian army under General Michael von Mehlers is trying to escape east, so he spread his forces out across miles of countryside to catch them. You and about 15,000 other French troops are around the village of Marengo, while another 10,000 are scattered elsewhere. It's a smart plan if the enemy is actually retreating, but they're not. As the morning fog lifts, an unmistakable sound rolls across the plains like distant thunder, cannon fire, a lot of it. Holy shit, Marcel whispers, his face going pale beneath his weathered tan. That's a full attack. Within minutes, officers are shouting orders, drummers are beating assembly, and your regiment is forming up. Through gaps in the morning mist, you catch glimpses of the Austrian army emerging from Alessandria, not retreating at all, but advancing in full force, 30,000 men with over 100 cannons against your scattered 15,000 with barely a dozen guns. Wait, this can't be right. Napoleon is supposed to be the one surprising enemies, not the other way around. But here you are. The first consul was wrong, someone says nearby. We're completely outnumbered, and just like that, you're marching forward into what might be the last day of your life. See, Napoleon Bonaparte's not actually with you. That's another problem. He's miles away at his headquarters, convinced the Austrians are retreating, not attacking. By the time messengers reach him with news of the assault, precious hours will be lost. The initial Austrian attack hits like a hammer. Their artillery opens up and the sound is deafening, not just the boom of the cannons, but the whistling shriek of round shot tearing through the air, followed by the sickening thud when it finds its target. You watch in horror as a cannonball rips through your formation, taking 3 men with it in a spray of red. Your regiment forms up along a small stream called the Fontenone. It's not much of a defensive position, just a narrow waterway with steep banks, but it's all you've got. The orders are simple. Hold this line at all costs. The Austrians come in waves, their white uniforms standing out against the green fields. Their first assault hits the French centre, where General Victor's division is positioned. Your own regiment is part of General Lanz's division, off to the right flank. "All steady," your captain shouts. "Wait for the order." The first Austrian attack is repulsed. Men cheer around you. Maybe this won't be so bad after all, but then you look west and your heart sinks. More Austrian columns are forming up, a lot more. "I've been in 12 battles," Marcel says, calmly reloading his musket, "and I've never seen odds this bad." "Then why are you so calm?" you ask, your own hands shaking as you try to reload. He shrugs. "If today's my day, it's my day. Besides, I've seen the little corporal pull off miracles before." The little corporal, that's what veterans like Marcel call Napoleon, a nickname from his early days as a young artillery officer. But right now, the little corporal is nowhere to be seen and his soldiers are in serious trouble. The second Austrian attack is stronger than the first. They've brought up more artillery, and the French line along the Fontenone is being pounded mercilessly. The air fills with smoke so thick you can barely see 20 paces ahead. The roar of gunfire becomes continuous, not individual shots, but a rolling thunder of muskets and cannon. Time loses meaning in battle. Minutes stretch like hours. Hours compress into moments. The fighting along the Fontenone continues throughout the morning, attack after attack. The stream's water runs red in places. The bodies pile up on both banks. By noon, the situation is dire. The Austrians have found a gap north of your position and are threatening to outflank the entire French line. General Victor's division in the centre is running dangerously low on ammunition. Some units have completely run out, reduced to using their muskets as clubs or throwing stones. Then the worst happens. The Austrian weight of numbers finally tells. Their 30,000 men and 100 guns against the French, 16,000 men and 15 guns is simply too much. First one French regiment breaks, then another. The retreat begins, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. Your captain shouts for an orderly withdrawal, but there's nothing orderly about what follows. The French line collapses, and suddenly you're running eastward across those same fields you defended all morning. Austrian cavalry appears, charging into the retreating French infantry. Men who stop to make a stand are cut down. "Stay together," Marcel shouts over the chaos. "If we scatter, we're dead." Your regiment manages to maintain some cohesion as it falls back, fighting a desperate rearguard action. But all around you, the French army is disintegrating. By 3 in the afternoon, the battle seems utterly lost. The French have been driven back almost a mile from their original positions, leaving behind their dead, their wounded, and most of their artillery. This is what defeat looks like. Complete catastrophic defeat. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, a messenger finally reaches Napoleon Bonaparte with the news that his army is fighting for its life. The story goes that when Napoleon heard the distant sound of cannon fire that morning, he dismissed it. Just a reconnaissance in force, he supposedly said. Even Napoleon Bonaparte, first consul of France and arguably the greatest military mind of his generation, could make a colossal misjudgment. By the time he realizes his error and races toward the battlefield, the situation appears hopeless. The French army that had marched triumphantly over the Alps is now streaming eastward in retreat, pursued by victorious Austrians. You're exhausted, parched and terrified as you stumble across the plains east of Marengo. Your unit has been reduced to perhaps half its original strength. Marcel is still with you, blood streaming from a minor wound on his forehead but otherwise intact. "This is it," someone nearby says. "The campaign is over. We'll be lucky to make it back to France alive." The retreat continues throughout the early afternoon. The Austrian pursuit, thankfully, isn't particularly aggressive. General Melas, the 70-year-old Austrian commander, believes he's won a decisive victory. So confident is he in his triumph that he returns to Alessandria to write his victory dispatch, leaving his chief of staff, General Zach, to handle the pursuit. It's a decision that will go down as one of the worst in military history. Around 5 o'clock, as your shattered regiment reaches the village of San Giuliano, something unexpected happens. Fresh troops appear on the road, French troops, marching westward toward the sound of battle, not away from it. "Who are they?" you ask, staring in disbelief. Marcel squints, then breaks into a gap-toothed grin. "That's Desai's division. They've come back." General Louis Desai had been detached from the main army with his division of 5,000 men to block what Napoleon thought would be the Austrian escape route. When Desai heard the distant sound of battle, he turned his division around and marched to the sound of the guns, a soldier's most sacred duty. Now, as the sun begins its westward descent, Desai's fresh troops are arriving on the battlefield, and with them is Napoleon himself, rallying the retreating soldiers. "I've gone far enough for today," Napoleon announces to his men. "It is my habit to sleep on the field of battle. The effect on morale is electric. Retreating soldiers stop in their tracks. Scattered units reform. Napoleon, the master psychologist as well as the master strategist, knows exactly what his demoralized army needs to hear." Wait, am I making this up? Did he actually say that? Look, Napoleon was basically a walking quote machine. Half the things attributed to him were probably made up later, but it makes for a damn good story, right? Desai reportedly tells Napoleon, "This battle is completely lost." But it's only 3 o'clock. There is still time to win another. And that's exactly what they set out to do. Napoleon quickly develops a new plan. While the remnants of his battered army reform their lines, Desai's fresh division will prepare a counterattack. General Marmont gathers all available artillery, just 18 guns, and positions them to blast the advancing Austrians. Meanwhile, General Kellerman's heavy cavalry, which has remained relatively intact, is held in reserve for the decisive moment. The Austrians, believing they're simply mopping up a defeated enemy, advance in a long column along the main road, their guard down. It's General Zach leading the Austrian advance guard of Grenadiers elite troops, but moving forward with the casual confidence of men who think the fighting is over. They have no idea what's about to hit them. At about 5:30, Desai's division strikes. The 9th Light Regiment leads the attack, pouring heavy fire into the surprised Austrians. For a moment, the Austrians waver, but then begin to form up to meet this unexpected threat. It's at this critical moment that tragedy strikes. General Desai, leading from the front as always, is shot through the heart and dies instantly. His last words, according to legend, tell the first consul that I die regretting that I have not done enough to live in posterity. Again, with the suspiciously perfect last words. I mean, who knows if he actually said that? The guy just got shot through the heart, not exactly prime time for eloquent speeches, but it's one of those stories that's too good to not tell. The death of their commander could have broken the French attack. Instead, it galvanizes Desai's men. "Avenge our general" becomes their battle cry as they surge forward with renewed fury. And then comes the masterstroke. As the Austrians struggle to deploy from column into line to meet Desai's infantry attack, Napoleon gives the signal. General Kellerman's 400 heavy cavalrymen mounted on massive horses and armed with long straight swords charge directly into the Austrian flank. The impact is devastating. The Austrian grenadiers, caught in an awkward formation and hit from an unexpected direction, crumble under the cavalry charge. Within minutes, what had been a victorious Austrian army disintegrates into panic. Over 2,000 surrender on the spot, including General Zach himself. The French counterattack spreads across the battlefield like wildfire. Units that had been retreating in defeat just hours earlier are now charging forward, driving the stunned Austrians back toward Marengo and the Bormida River. By nightfall, the battlefield that had witnessed a decisive Austrian victory at 3 o'clock has, by some military miracle, transformed into a decisive French victory by 7. The Austrians retreat in disorder across the Bormida, leaving behind thousands of dead, wounded, and captured. You and Marcel, who hours earlier had been certain you were facing defeat and possibly death, now find yourselves standing victorious on the same ground you'd been forced to abandon. The cost has been terrible, nearly 6,000 French casualties, but the Austrians have lost even more heavily, with 8,000 killed, wounded, or captured. As darkness falls, Napoleon Bonaparte stands triumphant on the battlefield of Marengo. This victory, snatched from the jaws of defeat, will cement his position as First Consul of France and pave the way for his eventual coronation as Emperor. And as for you and Marcel, you're alive, which is more than can be said for many of your comrades. You're exhausted, hungry, and blood-spattered, but alive. The next morning, the Austrian commander, General Melas, the man who'd been so confident of victory that he'd returned to Alessandria to write his triumphant dispatch, sends negotiators to Napoleon. The armistice he signs will give France control of northern Italy and cement Napoleon's reputation as a military genius. What no one mentions, of course, is how close it had been, how near to total disaster. In later years, Napoleon would rewrite the history of Marengo, downplaying his initial mistake and the role of men like Desailly and Kellerman in salvaging victory. The official narrative would become one of strategic brilliance rather than a desperate comeback. But those who were there, men like you and Marcel, would know the truth, that Marengo wasn't just a victory, it was a miracle. That evening, legend has it that Napoleon, hungry after his near-defeat turned stunning victory, asked his chef to prepare him a meal. The chef, finding little in the way of provisions, cobbled together a dish using a scrawny chicken, tomatoes, garlic, and other ingredients foraged from nearby farms. This improvised dish would become known as chicken Marengo, supposedly one of Napoleon's favourites thereafter. Like many good stories, it's probably not entirely true. Napoleon's chef at the time, a man named Dunand, wasn't even with him at Marengo, and tomatoes weren't common in northern Italian cuisine of the period. But again, why let facts get in the way of a good story? As you sit by a campfire that night, sharing a meagre meal with Marcel and the other survivors, the magnitude of what you've just lived through begins to sink in. You've witnessed one of history's most dramatic battlefield reversals, a defeat transformed into victory through a combination of leadership, courage, and simple luck. The little corporal pulled it off again, Marcel says, gnawing on a piece of bread. Don't know how he does it. But you were there. You saw how close it came to disaster, and you can't help but wonder, how many more miracles can one man's luck provide? How many more times can defeat be turned to victory? For now, though, you're simply grateful to be alive as you stretch out on the hard ground, your body aching from the day's exertions. As you drift towards sleep, the sounds of the army settling down for the night surround you, so different from the peaceful quiet of your bedroom back home. Unlike your comfortable modern bed with its soft pillows and warm blankets, tonight you'll sleep on Italian soil beneath the stars, with only a thin blanket between you and the earth. But you'll sleep as victors, not as defeated men, and sometimes that makes all the difference. The morning after Marengo is strangely quiet. Dawn breaks over a landscape transformed by violence. Yesterday, these fields outside Alessandria were green with summer crops. Now they're churned to mud and stained dark with blood. The air carries the metallic tang of gunpowder mixed with something worse, the beginning of decay, as thousands of bodies lie where they fell. You're one of the lucky ones. You survived. Your regiment took heavy casualties, almost 40%, but you and your friend Marcel made it through with nothing worse than exhaustion and a few scrapes. As you pick your way through the battlefield, helping to collect the wounded, the reality of yesterday's miracle victory sinks in. The French soldiers around you move with the hollow-eyed 1,000-yard stare that comes after cheating death. Nobody's celebrating. There's too much work to do, too many friends to bury. This is the part they never tell you about in the recruiting speeches, Marcel mutters, helping you carry a wounded man to the field hospital, really just a collection of tents where overworked surgeons labour non-stop, their aprons so soaked with blood they look like butchers. The day after glory. The wounded man between you whimpers as you jolt over uneven ground. He can't be more than 16, a drummer boy caught by Austrian grape shot. His left leg is a mangled mess below the knee. He'll lose the leg, Marcel says quietly, making sure the boy can't hear. If he's lucky, that's all he'll lose. Death doesn't always come quickly on the battlefield. Sometimes it lingers for days as infection sets in. You've seen it before, the slow spread of putrefaction, the fever, the delirium, men begging for water, then begging for death. You reach the hospital tents and surrender your burden to a harried medical orderly. The smell inside is overwhelming: blood, urine, feces, and the sickly sweet odour of gangrene. The sound is worse: moans, screams, and the terrible wet sounds of surgery performed without anaesthesia. "Come on," Marcel says, pulling you away. "Nothing more we can do here." As you walk back toward your regiment's position, you pass a different kind of tent, larger, with guards posted outside. The Emperor's tent. Not that he's Emperor yet. In 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte is still just the first consul of France, technically one of 3 men sharing power. But everyone knows who's really in charge. They say he slept on the battlefield last night, Marcel tells you, just like he promised. You believe that? You ask. Marcel snorts. Maybe, maybe not, but the men believe it, and that's what matters. That's Napoleon's genius. He knows exactly what his soldiers need to hear, what stories will fire their imagination and loyalty. Whether he actually slept on the hard ground or retired to a comfortable bed in a requisitioned villa doesn't matter. The legend is what counts. And speaking of legends, as you pass the command tent, the flap opens and out steps the man himself. It's your first close look at Napoleon Bonaparte, and he's smaller than you expected, not the tiny figure of later British propaganda, but certainly not imposing, maybe 5'6", with a pale complexion and dark hair cut short in the Roman style. But his eyes, there's something in those grey-blue eyes that makes you straighten automatically, like a schoolboy caught slouching. He's surrounded by a cluster of officers in brilliant uniforms, a stark contrast to his own simple green coat of a colonel of the Chasseurs à Cheval, his favourite regiment of the Consular Guard. While his generals gleam with gold braid and decorations, Napoleon's only ornament is a small tricolour cockade on his plain bicorn hat. He pauses, surveying the battlefield with those penetrating eyes. Then he notices you and Marcel, 2 common soldiers frozen in mid-step. "From which regiment?" he asks directly, his voice higher than you'd imagined, his accent still carrying traces of his Corsican origins. Marcel snaps to attention. "The 9th Light, Citizen First Consul, Lanz's division. The 9th? You fought well yesterday." Napoleon's gaze moves between you. "Were you present for the final attack?" "Yes, Citizen First Consul," Marcel answers. "We were retreating with the rest when General Desai arrived. We turned and fought." A shadow crosses Napoleon's face at the mention of Desai, a great man. France has lost one of her finest sons. There's genuine emotion in his voice. You've heard that Napoleon and Desai were close friends, comrades from the Egyptian campaign of 1798. Now Desai lies dead, another body cooling on the field of Marengo. How is the morale in your unit? Napoleon asks, shifting topics abruptly. Marcel hesitates, and you can see him debating whether to speak the unvarnished truth or a comforting lie. He opts for somewhere in between. The men are tired, citizen first consul, and hungry, but proud of yesterday's victory. Napoleon nods, as if this confirms what he already knows. The supply wagons will arrive today. Meanwhile, there will be distributions of captured Austrian provisions. His gaze moves to you. And you, soldier? Your thoughts? The question catches you off guard. You're nobody, just one common soldier among thousands. Yet here's Napoleon Bonaparte asking your opinion as if it matters. I think the men would fight better on full stomachs, citizen first consul, you manage, immediately regretting your boldness. But Napoleon's mouth quirks in what might be the ghost of a smile. Indeed, an army marches on its stomach, as I am constantly reminding my quartermasters. He turns to one of his aides. General Berthier, see to it that food distributions begin immediately, using the Austrian supplies if necessary. Yes, citizen first consul, the aide responds. With a curt nod to you and Marcel, Napoleon continues on his inspection, trailed by his entourage of glittering officers. Holy shit, you breathe once he's out of earshot. Did that just happen? Marcel looks equally stunned. I think we just became part of the legend, and that's how legends grow one small interaction at a time, spreading through an army of thousands. By nightfall, the story of Napoleon personally ordering food distributions after speaking with common soldiers will have travelled through the entire camp, growing more impressive with each retelling. The reality of those food distributions is somewhat less impressive. Your dinner that evening consists of captured Austrian hardtack rock-hard biscuits designed to last for months without spoiling, softened in brackish water, along with a small portion of salted pork and a ladleful of thin soup. Luxury compared to yesterday's near starvation, but hardly a feast. Still, with full bellies for the first time in days, the mood in the camp improves noticeably. Men who yesterday were too exhausted to do more than collapse into sleep now sit around campfires, talking and even laughing. The horror of battle begins to fade, replaced by the peculiar camaraderie that exists only among those who have faced death together and survived. You know what's funny? Marcel says, chewing thoughtfully on his softened hardtack. I've been in the army 7 years, fought in maybe 20 battles, and I can't remember most of them. They all blur together after a while, but I'll remember Marengo till the day I die. Because we almost lost, you ask. He shakes his head, because we shouldn't have won. Days like yesterday, they're what separate the truly great generals from the merely good ones. Any officer can win when everything goes according to plan, but to snatch victory from certain defeat, that takes something special. Around your campfire, other soldiers nod in agreement. Despite his mistakes earlier in the day, spreading the army too thin, misreading Austrian intentions, Napoleon had managed to turn catastrophe into triumph in the space of a few hours. If that isn't military genius, what is? As night falls, you find yourself assigned to sentry duty along with Marcel and 2 other men from your company. Your post is near the edge of the camp with a clear view of the darkened battlefield where Austrian torches flicker as they continue collecting their dead and wounded. Think they'll try again tomorrow? One of the other sentries asks nervously, a young recruit on his first campaign. Marcel shakes his head. Not a chance. Their army's broken. Melas will be lucky if he can get his remaining forces across the Po River intact. So what happens now, you ask? Marcel shrugs. The Austrians sue for peace. We get to go home heroes. Bonaparte becomes a little more powerful, and then we wait for the next war to start. You're a cynical bastard, the 4th century laughs. 7 years in Bonaparte's armies will do that to you, Marcel replies, but there's no bitterness in his voice. Despite his cynicism, you know he admires Napoleon. They all do, these veterans who followed him from victory to victory across Italy, Egypt, and now back to Italy again. The night passes slowly. You fight to stay awake, pinching yourself and pacing to keep from nodding off. Falling asleep on sentry duty is punishable by death, though in practice, first offences are usually handled with a brutal flogging instead. Neither option appeals to you. Around midnight, you notice movement on the darkened plain. Tensing, you raise your musket, peering into the gloom, but it's not an Austrian patrol, it's a woman, moving among the bodies with a lantern. "What the hell?" the young recruit whispers. "Who is that?" "Camp follower," Marcel says grimly, "robbing the dead." In every army, there are women who follow the troops' wives, lovers, laundresses, cooks, and yes, scavengers who strip the battlefield of valuables after the fighting ends. It's a grim business, but a profitable one. "Shouldn't we stop her?" you ask. Marcel shrugs. "Why? The dead have no use for coins or rings, and she's probably got children to feed." It's another harsh reality of war that the romantic paintings and heroic poems never mention the desperate ecosystem that springs up around armies. For every soldier in Napoleon's forces, there's at least one civilian whose livelihood depends on the military machine. Sutlers selling food and drink, women washing clothes and tending the sick, craftsmen repairing equipment, and less savoury characters providing gambling, prostitution and other vices. Dawn arrives with a thin drizzle that turns the churned earth to mud. Your sentry duty over, you trudge back to your regiment's position, looking forward to a few hours of sleep before whatever tasks the day brings. But as you approach the camp, you notice unusual activity, officers shouting orders, men forming into columns, supply wagons being loaded. "What's happening?" you ask a passing sergeant. "We're moving out," he answers. "First consul's orders. The whole army's heading east." East? But the Austrians retreated west. The sergeant gives you a look that suggests he's questioning your intelligence. "We're not chasing them, you idiot. We're going to Milan. Word is Bonaparte's negotiating an armistice, but he wants to do it from a position of strength. That means securing northern Italy." This is classic Napoleon never resting, always pushing forward, using momentum to multiply the impact of victory. While other generals might have paused to rest their troops after a battle like Marengo, Bonaparte is already thinking 3 moves ahead, positioning his forces to maximise political leverage. Within hours, the entire French army is on the move, leaving behind burial details to inter the dead of both sides. The rain continues, turning the roads to muddy tracks that suck at your boots with every step. The march is miserable cold, wet, exhausting, but at least you're alive to suffer through it, which is more than can be said for the thousands left behind in the fields of Marengo. Marcel walks beside you, somehow maintaining his usual stoic expression despite the discomfort. "You know what's strange?" he says after several miles of silent trudging. "This campaign's lasted barely a month, but it feels like a year." He's right. It's hard to believe that just weeks ago you were part of the army of reserve assembling at Dijon in eastern France. From there, you'd marched to Geneva, then undertaken the grueling crossing of the Alps via the Great St. Bernard Pass, a feat that military historians would later rank alongside Hannibal's famous crossing 2,000 years earlier. The reality of that crossing had been far less romantic than Jacques-Louis David would later paint it. No rearing charger for Napoleon, who actually rode a sure-footed mule, no dramatic cape billowing in mountain winds, just thousands of men struggling up narrow paths, dragging artillery pieces disassembled and carried in hollowed-out tree trunks, losing fingers to frostbite and comrades to avalanches. After descending into Italy, you'd fought a series of small but sharp engagements as Napoleon manoeuvred to cut the Austrian supply lines. Then came Marengo itself, the battle that had nearly ended in disaster before becoming Bonaparte's latest miracle. And now you're marching again, eastward toward Milan, the capital of Lombardy and the political prize of the campaign. Your feet hurt, your uniform chafes where it's soaked through, and your empty stomach reminds you that the promised supply wagons still haven't fully caught up with the army. But the column's mood is surprisingly upbeat. Victory has a way of making discomfort more bearable. Men sing as they march old revolutionary songs mostly, with a few bawdier tavern tunes mixed in. Officers who might normally crack down on such informality let it pass. After Marengo, the army has earned some latitude. 3 days later, you reach Milan. The city welcomes the French army as liberators, at least officially. Civic leaders who only weeks earlier had pledged loyalty to Austria now proclaim their eternal devotion to France and First Consul Bonaparte. Flags are raised, speeches made, victory parades organised. For common soldiers like you, the city's welcome translates to more practical benefits. Real beds in requisitioned housing, decent food, and brief liberty to explore the city's taverns, cafes, and other entertainments. Now this, Marcel says, leaning back in a chair at a small cafe near Milan's magnificent cathedral, is how military campaigns should end. You have to agree. After weeks of hard marching, inadequate rations, and the terror of battle, civilization feels like an impossible luxury. The coffee in your cup is hot and strong, the bread on your plate is fresh, and for the first time in memory, you don't smell of sweat, mud, and gunpowder, having taken advantage of actual bathing facilities at your billet. Enjoy it while it lasts, Marcel advises, taking an appreciative sip of local wine. We'll be marching again before you know it. You think so? I heard the Austrians are negotiating. Marcel nods. They are, but signing papers doesn't mean the war's over. They're still fighting in Germany, and even if peace comes tomorrow, Bonaparte will find another war soon enough. He always does. There's no judgment in Marcel's voice, just the pragmatic assessment of a career soldier who has learned not to hope for long periods of peace. Napoleon's France is a nation perpetually at war, either with foreign enemies or its own counter-revolutionary factions. For men like Marcel, peace would mean unemployment at best, half-pay retirement at worst. As if to punctuate his point, a breathless young officer appears at your table, clearly searching for men from your regiment. "You two 9th Light?" he demands. Marcel straightens. "Yes, Lieutenant." "Report to headquarters immediately. Fatigue detail." So much for your afternoon of leisure. Within the hour, you and Marcel are part of a working party unloading supply wagons in the courtyard of the Palazzo Reale, Milan's royal palace, and Napoleon's temporary headquarters. As you labour, the palace buzzes with activity. Couriers come and go, bearing dispatches from other French armies and responses to Austrian peace overtures. Staff officers hurry between meetings, arms full of maps and documents. It's the nerve centre of an empire in the making, though in 1800 few would have predicted how far Napoleon's ambitions would eventually reach. Through an open window, you catch glimpses of the man himself working at a desk piled high with papers. Unlike his subordinates who seem harried and exhausted, Napoleon appears energized, moving from task to task with relentless focus. They say he needs only 4 hours of sleep per night, an inhuman schedule that leaves more time for the business of war and governance. He never stops, does he? You murmur to Marcel as you haul another crate of supplies. That's why he wins, Marcel replies simply. While other generals sleep, he plans. While kings hold court, he studies maps. He outworks everyone. It's an insight into Napoleon that historians would later confirm. His genius wasn't just tactical brilliance or personal courage, but an almost supernatural capacity for work, an ability to process information and make decisions faster than his opponents. The fatigue detail lasts well into evening. By the time you're dismissed, night has fallen over Milan, and all thoughts of enjoying the city's pleasures have been replaced by the simple desire for sleep. You stumble back to your billet, a small room shared with Marcel and 3 other soldiers in a requisitioned townhouse, and collapse onto your straw mattress without even removing your boots. For once, sleep comes easily, without the nightmares that often followed battle. Perhaps it's simple exhaustion, or perhaps it's the knowledge that, for now at least, you're safe. The Austrians are in retreat, peace negotiations are underway, and you've survived another campaign under the banner of the most successful general in Europe. As consciousness fades, your thoughts drift to Napoleon, still working by candlelight in his palace office while his soldiers sleep. What visions drive him? What ambitions keep him awake while others rest? What will he lead France to next? Those are questions for tomorrow. Tonight, you sleep the sleep of the victorious, deep and dreamless, and mercifully far from the bloodied fields of Marengo. A week passes in Milan. The rhythm of military occupation settles into something almost resembling normal life. Your regiment is assigned to guard duty at various points throughout the city. Mundane work compared to the terror and glory of battle, but nobody's complaining. Guard duty means regular meals, dry beds, and a distinct lack of people trying to kill you. After Marengo, such simple comforts feel like luxury. Today, you're posted outside the Palazzo Serbelloni, a magnificent aristocratic residence where high-level negotiations between French and Austrian representatives are taking place. The Austrians have sent Count Joseph von Neipperg to hammer out armistice terms with Napoleon's chief of staff, General Alexandre Berthier. "Stand up straight," Marcel hisses as a group of officers approaches the palace entrance. That's Berthier himself. You stiffen to attention as General Berthier passes, trailed by aides carrying map cases and document folios. He barely glances at you and Marcel, just 2 more anonymous soldiers among thousands. "Think they'll reach an agreement today?" you ask once the officers are inside. Marcel shrugs. They will eventually. The Austrians don't have much choice after Marengo. It's just a question of how many concessions Bonaparte squeezes out of them. And then we go home? Marcel gives you a pitying look. Maybe you do, if your enlistment's up. The rest of us go wherever Bonaparte points next. The doors open again, and this time it's the Austrian delegation arriving, sombre men in white uniforms with green facings, their faces carefully blank as they pass between French guards. You notice they still wear their sidearms, a diplomatic courtesy that acknowledges their status as negotiators rather than prisoners. "That's Neipperg," Marcel says quietly, nodding toward a tall, distinguished-looking Austrian. "They say he's sleeping with Napoleon's wife back in Paris." "What?" You nearly drop your musket in shock. How would you even know that? Rumours. The army runs on them. Probably not true, but makes for good gossip. Ironically, while the rumour about Josephine and Neipperg in 1800 was false, history would take a strange turn. Years later, after Napoleon divorced Josephine and married Marie-Louise of Austria, Neipperg would indeed become Marie-Louise's lover and eventually her husband after Napoleon's final defeat. But that's the future. For now, Count Neipperg is just a defeated Austrian trying to salvage what he can from negotiations with the victorious French. The morning passes slowly. Guard duty is mind-numbingly dull hours of standing at attention, punctuated by brief moments of activity when someone enters or exits the palace. Your legs ache, your back stiffens, and boredom becomes its own special form of torture. "What do you think they're talking about in there?" you ask Marcel during a quiet moment. Territory, money, prisoners, the usual. Marcel's been through this before in previous campaigns. Bonaparte will demand northern Italy, maybe parts of Germany too. The Austrians will try to keep as much as they can. Eventually they'll reach a compromise that neither side loves, but both can live with. "And that's peace?" Marcel snorts. "That's a pause. Big difference." Around midday, the negotiations break for lunch. Servants appear with trays of food and wine, not for the guards of course, but for the diplomats inside. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread wafts through the open doors, making your stomach growl despite the bread and cheese you had for breakfast. "Christ, I'm starving," you mutter. "Always are on guard duty," Marcel commiserates. "It's the standing still, burns more energy than marching somehow." As the diplomatic lunch continues inside, you notice a small commotion at the far end of the street. A crowd is gathering, parting to make way for someone. Then you hear it, the growing sound of cheers and applause, moving closer. "Bonaparte," Marcel says, straightening his posture. "Has to be." He's right. Moments later, Napoleon himself appears, walking briskly toward the palace. Unlike his usual military entourage, he's accompanied by just 2 aides and seems to be in civilian dress, a simple dark coat and white breeches rather than his military uniform. The crowd follows at a respectful distance, ordinary Milanese citizens straining for a glimpse of the man who has become the most famous figure in Europe. Some call out his name, others simply applaud. Napoleon acknowledges them with brief nods but doesn't slow his pace. As he reaches the palace steps, you and Marcel snap to attention, presenting arms with parade ground precision. Napoleon pauses, his sharp gaze taking in your regiment's insignia. "The 9th Light," he remarks. "You were at Marengo." "Yes, citizen first consul," you both answer in unison. Napoleon studies your faces for a moment, and to your surprise, a flicker of recognition crosses his features as he looks at you. "We've met before, soldier." You're stunned that he remembers. "Yes, citizen first consul, the morning after the battle." He nods, satisfied. "How is morale in the city?" "Good, citizen first consul," Marcel answers. "The men are well rested and well fed." "Excellent. They've earned it." With that, Napoleon continues into the palace, leaving you and Marcel exchanging astonished glances. "Did that just happen?" you whisper once he's gone. "Again?" "His memory is unnatural," Marcel says, shaking his head in wonder. "They say he knows thousands of his soldiers by name, remembers details about their service, their hometowns, their families." It's another element of the Bonaparte legend, his ability to connect with common soldiers, to make each man feel personally valued. Whether it's a calculated political skill or genuine interest hardly matters. The effect is the same, unshakable loyalty from the ranks. Inside the palace, the tempo of negotiations shifts with Napoleon's arrival. Though you can't hear what's being said, the pattern of people coming and going, aides rushing with documents, officers being summoned and dismissed, suggests increasing urgency. "He's taking over," Marcel observes. "Berthier was just keeping the chair warm." By late afternoon, an unusual stillness has fallen over the palace. No more messengers rushing in and out, no more huddles of staff officers discussing developments. Whatever is happening inside has reached a critical stage. When the doors finally open around dusk, both delegations emerge together. French and Austrian officers intermingled, their expressions professional but noticeably relaxed compared to earlier. Behind them comes Napoleon, deep in conversation with Count Nyperg. "It's done," Marcel murmurs. "Look at them." You see what he means. The body language has changed completely. There's still formality, but the tension has dissipated. Whatever terms have been agreed upon, both sides seem reasonably satisfied or at least resigned. Napoleon and Nyperg pause at the top of the palace steps. They shake hands firmly, exchange a few final words, then part ways Nyperg to rejoin his Austrian colleagues, Napoleon to confer with Berthier and his staff. As darkness falls, you and Marcel are finally relieved from your post by the night watch. Your legs are cramping from hours of standing, and your empty stomach has progressed from complaining to outright rebellion. "Come on," Marcel says. "I know a tavern near our billet, not too expensive." The tavern is crowded with off-duty French soldiers and curious locals. Despite the language barrier, a rowdy camaraderie has developed, aided by the universal translators of wine, music, and mutual curiosity. You find a small table in the corner, and Marcel somehow procures 2 bowls of hearty bean soup and a carafe of local wine. "To peace," he says, raising his cup, "however temporary." You clink cups and take a grateful swallow. The wine is rough but honest, warming you from the inside. "So, what happens now?" you ask between spoonfuls of soup. "Now?" Marcel tears off a chunk of bread. Now the first consul becomes more powerful than ever. Marengo's made him untouchable. The revolution's over, my friend. Bonaparte's France is beginning. Is that good or bad? Marcel considers the question seriously. Depends. For soldiers, probably good, at least for a while. He takes care of the army. For France, who knows? He's brought order after chaos, which most people appreciate, but men with that much ambition rarely stop reaching for more. You're not much for politics. Your enlistment in the French army had been more about escaping poverty than revolutionary ideals, but even you can sense the historical weight of what's happening, the French Revolution's turbulent energy channeling itself into one extraordinary man's vision. They're saying he'll be named consul for life, Marcel continues, lowering his voice, though the tavern's noise makes it unlikely anyone could overhear. First step to becoming king in all but name. Isn't that against everything the revolution stood for? Revolutions devour themselves, kid. Always have, always will. The idealists start them, then the pragmatists take over, then the strongmen restore order. Tale as old as time. Before you can respond, the tavern door bursts open, and a breathless young officer appears. The room gradually quiets as he makes his way to the centre. "For citizens, soldiers of France," he announces, his voice carrying above the diminishing conversation, "I bring news from the Palazzo Serbelloni. The Convention of Alessandria has been signed." A murmur runs through the crowd. "Austria cedes all territory in Italy, north of the Po River." The officer continues. "All Austrian forces must withdraw behind the Mincio River within 2 weeks. The fortresses of Tortona, Alessandria, Milan, Turin, and Genoa are to be surrendered to French control." The tavern erupts in cheers. Men pound tables, raise glasses, embrace each other. In one stroke, Napoleon has regained nearly everything France lost in Italy during his absence in Egypt. The campaign that began with the daring crossing of the Alps has concluded with complete success. And one more announcement, the officer shouts over the celebration. The first consul will depart for Paris within 3 days. Units assigned to the Army of Italy will remain under General Massena's command. All others will prepare to return to France. This news brings another round of cheers, especially from those like you whose regiments aren't part of the occupation force. Going home, or at least back to France, is a prospect worth celebrating. "Looks like you might get your wish after all," Marcel says, refilling your cup. "Paris isn't home, but it's closer than Milan." The tavern celebration continues well into the night. Songs are sung old revolutionary anthems mostly, with lyrics hastily updated to praise Bonaparte rather than abstract notions of liberty. Toasts are made to France, to the army, to the first consul, to fallen comrades. A few brave souls even attempt to teach French drinking songs to the bemused Italian tavern staff. It's past midnight when you and Marcel finally stagger back to your billet, pleasantly drunk and buoyed by the news of peace and homeward movement. The streets of Milan are still lively despite the hour other soldiers and civilians continuing impromptu celebrations. Torches and lanterns illuminating the ancient thoroughfares. "You know what's strange?" Marcel slurs slightly as you navigate the narrow lanes. "This whole campaign, barely 6 weeks from start to finish, crossed the Alps, won some skirmishes, lost a battle, won it again, secured northern Italy, signed a peace treaty. 6 weeks. Most campaigns take years." He's right. The speed of the Italian campaign has been breathtaking, a testament to Napoleon's style of warfare, rapid movement, decisive concentration of forces, and immediate political exploitation of military success. It's a new kind of war for a new century, and conventional powers like Austria are struggling to adapt. The next morning brings the predictable consequences of celebratory excess-pounding headaches and queasy stomachs, but it also brings new orders. Your regiment, along with several others from Lanz's division, will indeed be returning to France as part of Napoleon's escort. "Could be worse," Marcel comments as you pack your meagre belongings. "Escort duty means decent roads and regular supplies. Better than staying here to garrison Milan through winter." The preparations for departure consume the next 2 days. Equipment is checked, damaged items replaced, ammunition distributed, administrative matters are handled with surprising efficiency, pay arrears settled, casualty lists finalised, commendations recorded. Throughout it all, a sense of accomplishment permeates the army. These men have participated in something extraordinary, a campaign that will feature in history books and military academies for generations to come. They've followed Napoleon Bonaparte over the Alps, like Hannibal's legendary crossing, fought against overwhelming odds at Marengo, and